So today, I want to talk a little bit about second chances. So the thing that I want you guys to remember when you walk away today from this sermon is second chances. And the fact that God is a God that gives us second chances. So you and I are not so different from a rose. Each rose is unique. Each petal is special. Just like you, just like this rose. But life sometimes has an interesting way of getting us down. Maybe it's school. Maybe it's work. Maybe it's a relationship. And petal by petal, life picks its way at us and tears us apart. Oops. So it keeps picking its way until eventually, what does life do? Breaks us in two. And then it throws us in the trash. So I'm going to keep this up here, but we'll get back to that later. So remember, you're special, just like that rose was. So this is a common idiom or phrase that you've probably heard before, but you've probably not heard the original. It goes like this from Benjamin Franklin. Our new Constitution is now established and has an appearance that promises permanency, but in this world, nothing can be said to be certain except death and taxes. We all love to talk about taxes, I'm sure. Now we're in a new year, right? April's coming quickly. We're going to have to start doing our taxes and get ready for taxes. So today we're going to talk a little bit about a tax man that you're probably actually a little familiar with. His name is Zacchaeus. And talk about the power of a restart. So I hope you brought your swords with you today, your Bibles. If you would, please turn with me to Luke 19, verses 1 through 10. And that's where we're going to be in for the next little bit. And Zacchaeus is a pretty short story. It's really just these 10 verses, verses 1 through 10. So I'm going to start off, and I'm just going to read you the first little bit of the story, just to kind of set the tone for you. And this is how it goes. Chapter 19, verse 1. He entered Jericho and was passing through. So Jesus is going somewhere else. He's going through Jericho. Zacchaeus knows this, and he is already thinking about this, right? It says here, he was a chief, I'm sorry, I got ahead of myself. It says, and behold, there was a man named Zacchaeus. He was a chief tax collector and was rich. And he was seeking to see who Jesus was, but on account of the crowd, he could not because he was small in stature. And maybe you sang that song as a child, Zacchaeus was a wee little man. Many of us probably sang that song, so we're kind of familiar with the story of Zacchaeus and how short he was. So none of this is news to us, right? We all know this part of the story. But maybe you didn't realize how broken Zacchaeus really was. So let's get a little bit of perspective from what a tax collector might have been like back then. So in this story, the term publicani or public contractors is used. That's basically what it is, a public contractor, a tax collector for the Romans. And the system that you're probably not familiar with, even though you've heard the story of Zacchaeus, is tax farming. So the way that this worked back then was, let's say you're a tax collector for the Romans, you would bid on the right to collect taxes in a region, say for 5 years. So I'm going to give you a modern example just to kind of correlate with your mind right now and to understand a little bit better. So let's say, well, first let me explain a little bit more because it'll make more sense. So you would bid on the right to collect taxes in a region for 5 years to the Romans. And then let's say you won that contract, that bid. You had the highest bid. You would prepay the Romans the amount of taxes that they estimated you would be able to collect over those 5 years. So you would have to front that money, and then the way you would actually make money as a tax collector is you would overcollect whatever that bid was that you made. So let's say, I'm just going to use this as an example, again, a modern example. Let's say you bid $500, and I'm just using small numbers to make it easy on our brains today. So $500, you won the bid. Now you would have to collect more than $500 just to break even over the course of that next 5 years. So it really was a system designed to emphasize corruption, if that makes sense. Like, you were incentivized to overcollect more than you bid, because if you didn't, you're not making any money. You're not making any profit. The other way they would also make profit in this system is they would get paid interest by the Romans after the 5 years was up. So let's say you bid $500, 5 years is up, then they'll give you interest back on that money you fronted them. So those are the two ways you'd make money. So of course, you're incentivized to overcollect. So very corrupt system. Now I'm going to give you, again, a modern example. Let's say you're traveling, since it was just the holidays, this is a perfect example. Let's say you're traveling to visit family from here in Florida. You're going to travel and see family in Alabama because it's Christmas and you want to see your family. Well, you get stopped by a tax man and he says, you need to pay me this much. So he charges you, and then you keep traveling, you cross the border into Alabama, and another tax man stops you and says, you need to pay me taxes too, because now you're in Alabama. So you pay double the taxes you would have paid. And you'd think we complain about how much we get taxed in our modern society. Just imagine back then how bad that would have been, getting taxed and taxed and taxed to death. So as you can imagine, tax collectors were not the most friendly, wonderful people. People didn't just love their local tax collector because of all the corruption. They were actually considered outcasts. They weren't even allowed to go in synagogues. They were the bottom of society. And that's where we find Zacchaeus in this story. He was wealthy, but the bottom of society. So this is some perspective from Ellen White on Zacchaeus. So we read in the Bible that he was small in stature and he knew Jesus was coming. He was passing through Jericho at the time. And so what did Zacchaeus do? He ran ahead, he climbed a tree because he knew he was short, and he picked a spot right where he knew Jesus was passing through. So that kind of sets the tone here. And she says this: now hearing the words reported to have come from the great teacher, he felt that he was a sinner in the sight of God. Yet what he had heard of Jesus kindled hope in his heart. Repentance, reformation of life was possible even to him. Was not one of the new teacher's most trusted disciples a publican or a tax collector? This is Matthew, of course, she's referring to, because he was also a tax collector. Zacchaeus began at once to follow the conviction that had taken hold upon him and to make restitution to those whom he had wronged. So he already determined it in his heart before he even encountered Christ that day in Jericho that he was going to make amends for his actions. So then, what happens in the story? Jesus comes along. He comes up to the point where Zacchaeus is in the tree, and she says this: suddenly, just beneath the fig tree, the company came to a standstill, and one looked upward whose glance seemed to read the soul. Almost doubting his senses, the man in the tree heard the words, Zacchaeus, make haste and come down, for today I'm coming over to your house. So Zacchaeus was changed. He was a changed man. I have several pictures throughout my slideshow, and I've got words, and I want you to just focus on the words as I go through the sermon, because this is really the temperature of the point in the story, and you'll see it'll all come together in the end. So, what was the reaction of those that saw this happen in the story? Well, if we look at chapter 19, verse 7, it tells us, it says, "And when they saw it, they grumbled." They said things like this: "He's gone in to be a guest of a man who is a sinner." So they complained. So what can we take away from the reaction of the crowd in this story? Self-righteousness is an unnecessary distraction. I'll tell you just right away from my own experience. Have you guys ever taken those personality tests before? Like what letters you are? Well, I am an INFJ. So the last letter, judging. I'm a very judging person. So I have to watch myself, because I can be just like the people in this story, judging everything I see, judging every person I see, because that's my nature. So if you are anything like me, try to be a little less judging of people, because ultimately it's not our place to judge. And remember, what can we take away from the story? Our God is a God of second chances. He gave Zacchaeus a second chance. So remember that you are his. Jesus meets us wherever we're at. And the story ends in the most beautiful way. Like I read earlier, Zacchaeus says he will return fourfold everything he's stolen from people. And Jesus says this: "Today salvation has come to this house, since he also is a son of Abraham. For the Son of Man came to seek and save the lost." He didn't come for those that are already saved. He came for you and me who need saving still. So I want to talk a little bit about another story in the Bible that you're also probably super familiar with, the story of Jonah. So if you would, let's turn to the book of Jonah. And this is just a few books back into the Old Testament. And we're starting right at the beginning of the book. It's only 4 chapters long. We're not going to cover the whole book today because we don't really have time for that, but we are going to cover a few of the first chapters here. So I'm going to just start reading, and I'm going to read verses 1 all the way to verse 3, just to kind of get us understanding where the story is starting. It starts like this: "Now the word of the Lord came to Jonah the son of Amittai, saying, 'Arise, go to Nineveh, that great city, and call out against it, for their evil has come up before me.' But Jonah rose to flee to Tarshish from the presence of the Lord. He went down to Joppa and found a ship going to Tarshish. So he paid the fare and went down into it, to go with them to Tarshish, away from the presence of the Lord." So what was Jonah feeling right then? Fear. He was afraid. He wanted to do the opposite of what God was asking him to do. So this is a map just to give you a little geography lesson today of where this story may have taken place. So if you look right there at letter A on the screen, that is where Joppa is located, right on the coast. So the story starts out, he pays the fare, he goes down to Joppa, he hops on a ship, right? He goes out into the Mediterranean on this trade ship. Somewhere along the way, there's a storm, and we'll get to the rest in a second, but you already know the story. So there's many different places where Tarshish could be. One of the places is in Spain there, where letter C is located. just to give you an idea of how far he might have been traveling. And we don't know specifically where across the Mediterranean he got swallowed by a fish. But somewhere along the way, there's a storm and he gets swallowed by a fish. Nineveh, fun fact, is located in the complete opposite direction of where he was supposed to be headed at the time. It's actually in Assyria, which is modern-day Iraq. And it is located in the city of Mosul, which is the second largest city currently in Iraq today. At the time, this was the capital of Iraq. So Nineveh was probably the largest city back then. So I was trying to understand a little bit of what the ship may have looked like too. And so one of the civilizations back then that did a lot of sea trading was the Phoenicians. So this is a Phoenician trade ship. This may have been what it looked like when Jonah got on the ship. And they were known for trading across the Mediterranean, master traders. We even owe our alphabet to them, like the formation of some of our alphabet. They were very well known for their red, purple-dyed cloth. But what I want you to take away from this is just how the story started out. What did it say he did? He paid the fare, he hopped on a ship, and he went down into the hold, right? So if you see in the diagram here, we've got 4 different places where they can basically put things that they're transporting on the ship. So if you can just imagine Jonah paying the fare, going down one of those hatches, getting in the ship, getting comfortable, and going on the journey. So what happens then? A huge, mighty tempest comes up on the sea, and the ship is threatened to be broken up in pieces. And it says here that the captain of the ship comes down, wakes Jonah up because he's falling. He's just sleeping through this. I don't know how. I'm a light sleeper. Maybe you guys are heavy sleepers, but he was just sleeping through this storm that was happening, and he didn't even know. And the captain comes along and he says, "Arise, call out to your God. Perhaps the God will give a thought to us that we may not perish." And so Jonah listens to the captain, doesn't really respond, but the sailors are also terrified, and they don't know what to do in the situation either. So what do? They cast lots. So casting lots is a very common thing throughout the Bible. It's mentioned around 70 times. This is just approximation because there's different opinions on how much is mentioned throughout the Bible. And about 8 times in the New Testament, casting lots, they talk about it. So I'll just give you a little example of what this may have looked like, just as an illustration. So let's say you have 5 stones. Let's say one of the stones is black, 4 of the stones are white. You could have them in a bag or a pottery jar, and you shake them, or everybody reaches their hand in and grabs a stone out, right? And the person that grabs the black stone, that means the lot falls on them. So let's just say, in this story as an example, because the lot did fall on Jonah, he grabs that black stone. So immediately, the sailors know that it's his fault. The lot fell on Jonah. Then they said to him, "Tell us on whose account this evil has come upon us. What is your occupation? What do you do? And where are you coming from? What country are you coming from? What people do you belong to?" And he says straight up right away, "I'm a Hebrew, and I fear the Lord, the God of heaven, who made the sea and the dry land." And this just terrifies the sailors even more, because then they're like, well, then this is God. This has to be God doing this and causing this storm to happen. And so they ask him, "What are we going to do? What should we do with you, the cause of our issue here?" And he says, "Pick me up and throw me into the sea, and this storm is going to go right away." Now, they don't listen immediately. What they end up doing is they try to row even harder to get back to shore. And that doesn't work. They don't listen to Jonah. They don't listen to God. So what ends up happening then? Finally, they listen to him and they say, okay, we'll throw you into the water. They throw him into the Mediterranean, and immediately the sea ceased from its raging. That's what the Bible says. And the sailors feared God exceedingly, it says, and they offered a sacrifice to the Lord and made vows. So, Jonah is swallowed. He's helpless in this situation. There's nothing he can do. He didn't listen to God at the beginning. He went the opposite way, and now he's in this predicament. This is a painting I found online. This is, I believe, probably a whale shark. We always correlate whales with the story of Jonah, but we, in fact, don't know if it was really a whale that swallowed Jonah. The text doesn't say that it was a whale. It could have been a whale, could have been a whale shark, could have been a lot of other things. So, he's swallowed. So if we look at the Hebrew of the text that describes him being swallowed, it's Dag Gadol, and I don't know if I'm pronouncing that right, but that's what it is, which translates to great fish. And we don't really know. I mean, that's not a very great description, right? Great fish. I mean, there's a lot of different types of fish in the Mediterranean. But Jesus does mention the story of Jonah in Matthew 12, verse 40. So if you guys wouldn't mind, we're going to turn there really quick and just read through that, Matthew 12, verse 40. And keep your hand in Jonah because we're going to come right back to it. And here is what Jesus says about the story of Jonah. He says, "For just as Jonah was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the great fish, or Dag Gadol, so will the Son of Man be 3 days and 3 nights in the heart of the earth. The men of Nineveh will rise up at the judgment with this generation and condemn it, for they repented at the preaching of Jonah. And behold, something greater than Jonah is here." So, of course, we know that the New Testament was written in Greek, not in Hebrew. So the word that Jesus uses here is ketos, which is a sea serpent. So this is several different pictures of a ketos from historians. So the top picture is a image of like Greek pottery, I believe. So that is supposed to be a ketos from the Homer and the Iliad, describing that story. And then the bottom is a mosaic of a ketos. So it looks more like a dragon to me than a great fish, right? And there's lots of different historical accounts. I found like 20 or 30 different examples of where they use the word ketos. Historians use the word ketos. The fact of the matter is, it's not important what swallowed Jonah. What I want you to take away from this part of the story is the fact that God prepared this fish to swallow Jonah. It says right here, the Lord appointed a great fish to swallow up Jonah. That's more important than what it was. So I did find tons of different examples of modern examples of people being swallowed by whales, and a lot of them have actually been caught on camera. If you want, go and check this video out sometime on YouTube. I do want us to play the first story really quick. It's only like 2.5 minutes, so you can see, because it does have a video of a guy getting swallowed by a whale that was caught on film. But if you want, you can look it up later and see the rest of it, because there's story after story of all caught on video of people getting swallowed by whales.
It was a calm morning on July 30th, 2020, when Adrian Simakis and his friend Narciso Rojas set out in bright yellow kayaks along the coast of Bahia Mansa, Chile. The Pacific Ocean was like glass. A light haze hung over the horizon. Adrian had paddled here many times before. It was one of his favorite places to clear his head. Then, the water shifted below him. A massive shape stirred beneath the surface, dark and slow. And before he could react, the sea erupted. A humpback whale breached just feet away from his kayak, mouth wide open, in a massive feeding lunge. It was aiming for a school of anchovies, but Adrian's kayak was directly in the path. In a single heartbeat, the kayak vanished, engulfed in the whale's mouth, swallowed by a darkness and brine. Adrian would later say it felt like he had been yanked into another world. The sunlight disappeared. The water roared in his ears. His body was compressed by the force of the whale's mouth closing around him. For a moment, he couldn't breathe. He couldn't see. He couldn't even think. On a nearby whale-watching vessel, tourists screamed. One woman had been filming while it happened. Her voice cuts through the chaos on camera. "Si el comió." It ate him. It ate him. The whole thing lasted only a few seconds, but it was enough. Adrian was swallowed, and then, just as quickly, spit back out. The footage captured it all. That yellow kayak disappearing into the jaws of a humpback whale, a man vanishing, then reappearing from the sea, dazed but alive. The video would later go on to be viral across Latin America and shared on news broadcasts, social media, and marine safety forums. And suddenly, the name Adrian became a strange kind of legend. The man who was swallowed by a whale and survived. He was bruised, scraped, shaken, but otherwise okay. In interviews, Adrian described the experience not as violent, but more like confusing. "It didn't want me," he said. "It just didn't see me in time." Marine biologists agreed with him. Humpbacks are filter feeders. They don't have teeth. They use baleen plates to trap krill and anchovies. And their throats? Barely wide enough to swallow a grapefruit. And yet, Adrian disappeared into its mouth. In any other context, it would sound like a sailor's myth, a story told around the campfire. But it happened. It was caught on film. And Adrian wasn't the only one.
All right, that's a perfect stopping point. So you guys saw it on video, and there is more video if you want to look that up and watch that. But he gets swallowed. Adrian gets swallowed by the whale, so that's just a modern day example of it happening. Now, marine biologists all agree that although this is possible to be swallowed by a whale, it's not physically possible for a whale to keep you swallowed like it describes in the Bible. And all the accounts that are caught on video, it shows that the whale will swallow someone and then basically throw them back up like immediately, right? But remember, God prepared this great fish to do this. So with God, anything is possible, right? So chapter 2 of Jonah is all about being in the belly of the whale. And it's really just Jonah describing and praying to God and getting that peace that God can only provide to you and I. He says things like this. He says, "I called out to the Lord out of my distress, and he answered me." He says, "The waters closed in over me to take my life. The deep surrounded me. Weeds were wrapped around my head." But he ends it in the most beautiful way, too. He says, "Salvation belongs to the Lord." I think at this point in the story, Jonah has this peace that, again, only God can provide to him, right? Only God could provide that peace in the belly of the whale. Jonah had no idea if he was going to die. He may not even have realized what type of fish he was inside. He didn't know what was going on probably. He was probably very confused. You heard the account from Adrian, the modern account of how confusing it would be to be swallowed by a whale. Just dark. You can't see anything. You can't hardly breathe. You don't know what's going on. But again, it ends in the most beautiful way. Salvation belongs to the Lord. So this is from the Review and Herald, Ellen White, and she says this, "O stubborn sinner who will not come unto Christ that you might have life, Jesus will miss you." So I want you to take away from the story of Zacchaeus and the story of Jonah that yes, God is a God of second chances, but remember, there is a limit to those chances. So remember that too. God has promised that he will come back again. which means you can't keep getting a second and a third and a fourth and a fifth chance, right? There's a limited, finite amount of chances that you have. And if we look further into the story of Jonah, into the next chapter, actually looking back at Zacchaeus, the story of Zacchaeus, I forgot to mention this earlier, but if you look back into the next chapter of Zacchaeus, what happens? Christ comes to the triumphal entry in Jerusalem, and he has the Last Supper, and he dies on the cross. And the story of Zacchaeus happens right before that. So that was Zacchaeus' last chance to see and encounter Christ and give his heart to Christ. If he had not done it then, his chance would have been gone. So I want us to close today by looking at this picture of Adrian that we saw the video of. And what I want you to remember is these stories of Zacchaeus that we teach our kids in Sabbath school, the stories of Jonah getting swallowed by the whale that we teach, these are real stories that happened. They're as real as you and I today. And they really did happen. So, you may be broken like Zacchaeus was. You may be afraid like Jonah was. You may be helpless like Jonah was in the belly of the whale. But our God is a God of second chances. And he's here to give you a second chance today too. You may have a whale in your life. You may have a sycamore tree that you need to climb. But our God is a God of second chances. And he can pick you up out of the trash and make you whole again.